There you go. Fantastic. Mm, give me a second. So if you, for example, watch if you watch the Zoom link that I sent you, then you had already discovered that, well, today we're going to be discussing a new topic that is the final part of the speaking section. Now, um, if you think about what we have been studying in the um, in the previous weeks, you're going to, well, come to the conclusion that we have actually gone through the entire speaking section, right? And now with you, it's time, well, actually this very same week to move to another section of the TOEFL exam that is going to be the writing section. But before we do that, we're going to finalize with the speaking section. And of course, with the other task that we have not discussed yet, that is the fourth task. Now, we're going to discuss it tonight. Tomorrow, we're going to practice for it. And as I say, the rest of the week is going to be for us to be introduced to a new part of these classes, that is the writing section. And I think that you're going to enjoy it very much, and that you're going to be able to, of course, take advantage and avail every single second later on. But before we do that, as I say, start with the last part of the speaking section. I'm very much excited because we are finalizing this section. Because, well, for many students, this is certainly the most difficult part. And I think that with you, it has not been the case. You have actually performed very well in this section. As I told you, I was very much impressed by your level and your performances. And I'm sure that this is not going to be, of course, an exception, because it's actually easier. I think, well, in my opinion, the fourth task is actually easier than the previous ones, right? So for those of you who are just joining the class, we're going to discuss the last task of the speaking section. And of course, with that, we will be finalizing all the theoretical aspects of this very much feared section. But nonetheless, if you discover, and I think that you have realized it, well, you are very good at it, okay? So you don't have anything to worry about. Now, let us continue. If you read, it says, in the final task of the TOEFL speaking test, you will be required to hear a lecture and then give a short speech summarizing main idea or the main ideas of the lecture and the examples that are mentioned. Now, first thing I wanted to clarify, if you look at the title, it says integrated task. Well, this is maybe a little bit repetitive, but there's nothing to do, because as I told you, the second, the third, and the fourth task are all of them integrated tasks. That is to say, they have the integrated type of question. Therefore, as I told you, and as I told you in advance, actually, all these tasks are very similar. The only one that is, let's say, the rebel brother, or the rebellious brother in this case, is the first task, because it's the only type of question that has a different mechanism and structure. That is to say, it's a question that asks you to give your opinion, etc., right? You were independent. Now, if you remember, in the second, the third, and this fourth task are all of them integrated, all right? And because that is the case, maybe you guessed correctly, you are just going to be summarizing one more time some information sources you're going to receive. That is why, if you can see and look at my picture, you have the very same picture that we have been utilized in the previous weeks. It is a journalist, right? And why a journalist? Well, because a good journalist receives information, takes notes on it, makes a summary, and presents that summary to his or her audience. Is that what you're going to be doing? Yeah, exactly that. You're going to be copying, imitating a journalist. And well, actually, as I told you, in this task, in my opinion, is actually easier, your task as a journalist. Why? Because in the previous tasks, if you remember the second and the third one, you received two information sources for you to summarize. You received reading and also listening. Nonetheless, let me tell you what, for your surprise maybe, in this particular task, the fourth one, you're just going to have one information source to summarize. And maybe you're wondering, is this going to be something innovative, something that I have never seen before? Well, the response is no. You are going to be receiving a lecture. You remember that in the second and the third task, well, especially in the third task, right? You received a lecture as the listening passage you had to summarize. Well, here you will not have any difference. The information source you're going to be listening to and then summarizing in your response is going to be a lecture. On what? Well, on an academic subject as before. Mathematics, biology, physics, astronomy, computer science, medicine, it can be anything, right? Economics, I don't know, humanities, a lot of things. Well, the point, you're always going to receive this lecture as the information source. And as you can see, it's going to be the only information source. Apart from that, you will not read anything. You will not listen to any other thing. No, just the lecture and that's it. You listen to it and you summarize. Of course, we're going to have a different template and a structure because we don't want to, of course, be repetitive. We want to stand out from the rest. And I think that it's important for you to have a structure for every single task, right? So I want to share that structure with you. And before we get into that, let me get some commentaries here on the timing you want to have for this task. As you can see, the only variation here, maybe you were also expecting this already, is that the lecture you're going to listen to as your information source is going to be larger. It's going to be longer. Why? Well, because of course they don't want to make it that easy, right? And in this case, as I say, you're going to be summarizing this lecture that lasts for 2 minutes approximately, something sometimes a little bit more, 2 minutes and a half, something like that, but it doesn't exceed that time, just let me tell you that. So as I say, you're going to listen to this audio clip that is going to be a lecture on an academic subject, and this is going to last for approximately 2 minutes, right? Apart from that, no more information sources. After you finalize listening and taking notes, remember, very important, you're going to get into your 20 seconds of preparation. Here also the timing varies a little bit because if you remember, previously the third task and the second task, you had 30 seconds to prepare your response, right? And here you will have only 20. Maybe that is the way they want to compensate, let's say, the difficulty because, well, it is super easy, right? In this case, just to listen one particular lecture and then just to summarize what you have listened. They are trying to compensate, I guess, that time by reducing your preparation seconds. As you can see, not 30, but only 20. Now, what about the response time? Well, that doesn't vary, 60 seconds for you to respond. 1 minute, you are very much used to that. And that is fine, I think, because, well, given that you already know how to measure 1 minute because you have been practicing your responses in 1 minute in the second task and the third task, I think that ETS here gets it very right because it will be too dramatic to give you another time for you to respond because it will be too difficult for you to adapt yourself to this new timing. Now, when they give you 3 tasks that require you to respond in 60 seconds, all of them, I think it's very easy and manageable to, as I say, adapt and to get used to this type of timing. 60 seconds, 20 of preparation. You're going to be listening to an information source of 2 minutes approximately. All right, it's going to be a lecture, nothing of a different word. You have seen this already. Okay. Any question here, students, about the general aspects? Anything that I can clarify here about the fourth task? Tell me, I'm going to be delighted to help you. Questions here, Anaí, Sergio, Adriana, Jorge, Fabiana, Camila.
Everything is clear.
All right, thank you very much, Anaí. What about you guys? Questions?
It's clear.
Fantastic, Jorge. Thank you very much. Okay. So
Carlos,
there are no
I'm sorry,
questions.
can I
Oh, yes, please. Sergio.
I want to know if there is a kind of hack in this integrated speaking, like in the before task number 3, we have the notes, right? We have a kind of
Okay.
way to take notes to speak the second
Mhm.
tab. Is there a
I,
kind of
Sergio,
kind of
I'm not. I'm sadly not able to listen to you very well. It happened to me the same thing that happened with you last time. You remember, I listened to you sometimes in a very good volume and later it decreases and I cannot understand you. I don't know what happens. Could you please try to solve that so that I can maybe or you want to, for example, read or excuse me, write in the chat box your question maybe so that I can understand it. But sadly, I was not able to understand you very well. All right, but so please feel free to maybe correct that. and you can raise your hand later, or you can write it here in the chat box, okay? If as suits you better, okay? But thank you very much, sir, for your question. I'm going to be delighted to respond to it. Any other question, dear students? Anaí? Questions?
No.
All right, fantastic. Thank you. There you are. Well, let us continue then, okay? As Sergio manages to solve that little problem he had with the audio, or he writes it down in the chat box, let us continue, okay? So let us get into some additional topics now. Okay, let me discuss this. So what was I mentioning? Well, the following. Before we get into the structure that, as you can see, is this one, we're gonna, of course, as always, have some illustrations, right? For you to understand this better. So please, let us get into this website, and we're going to listen together to a lecture for the 4th task. You're going to notice the only difference is that it's longer. In this case, 2 minutes approximately, 2 minutes and a half. But apart from that, the complexity doesn't vary, and also the let's say the manner of professors speak doesn't vary. All right. So please, dear students, take your piece of paper, grab some pencil, and let us listen to this while taking notes, okay? So we can listen to my response later on. Let's go.
Now listen to part of a lecture from an economics class.
Today we're going to talk about a microeconomic concept referred to as opportunity cost. This concept speaks about the potential loss or gain from potential alternatives when one choice or course of action is taken over others. In its simplest form, the opportunity cost is the loss of the benefit that would have been enjoyed had a particular choice not been taken. This feeds back into the concept of scarcity that we discussed in the previous class. The idea that resources, such as time or money, are finite, and therefore choosing one thing often means not choosing something else. All of you guys are familiar with this concept. It applies to our daily lives as well. When we're selecting a movie to watch, say, the opportunity cost is whatever else we could have done during those 2 hours. As students, many of you could have used those 2 hours to do further study for your exams, say, or worked a couple of hours at a shop. You could even have watched another movie. I'm sure all of you have watched films before and thought, what a stinker. So, how does this relate to business? Well, businesses have 2 types of costs: explicit costs and implicit costs. Let's imagine, for instance, that a company needs to buy $200 of office supplies and sends one of its workers out to procure them. The explicit cost is the $200 for the office supplies. The implicit cost is the money the company paid the employee while he was performing that task. The company would have had to pay that employee whether he purchased those supplies or not, but he would have been doing an alternative task instead. Therefore, this activity has implicit costs of both time and money. What could the employee have achieved instead during the time he spent at Staples buying ink cartridges? Whatever that might have been is therefore the opportunity cost.
There you are. Great. Well, this was the lecture, as you could see. And well, in this case, well, if you pay attention here to the timing, it lasts for 1 minute and 59 seconds. Well, basically 2 minutes, right? Well, now that we have listened to this, imagine that the 20 seconds of preparation have already happened. I have prepared my response. I have outlined my response as well. I have done everything I had to. Now, it's time for me to respond. How would I do it? Let us listen, okay? Please, as it is our tradition, always pay attention to my introductory phrase. Pay attention to the elements that I am including in the middle of my response. Pay attention as well to my closing statements, how I organize my time. I think that all of those are very important aspects, okay? Let us start then with the listening.
In this lecture, we've been presented to the fascinating topic of opportunity cost, that is the value of every good when compared to what could have been done with the same good alternatively. Now, the professor gives an example of the real world when he says that if his students watch a 2 hours movie, what they could have done with the same amount of time would be their opportunity cost. They could have watched another movie, or they could have done their assignments. Moving this into the business world, the professor says that companies have 2 types of costs. that is to say, the explicit ones and the implicit ones. If a company requires its employee to go and get a $300 supply, those $300 would be the explicit cost, but those $200 that the company may pay its employee to go and get them would be the implicit ones. And this would be also opportunity cost because they have to consider what that is a specific employee could have done for the same amount of money.
Okay, great. Well, that is my response. As you can see, 1 minute. Well, I think it's quite noticeable that I am following a very similar template to the second one or to the third one, right? To the third one, because in the third task, we basically had to summarize these academic topics. And in this case, it's actually simpler because, well, you are not mentioning here, first of all, the reading passage and then transitioning from that until your listening. No, you are starting with the listening and you're finalizing with the listening because that is all you have. Well, fantastic. I think that for simplicity purposes, I think it's wonderful, right? Let us get into my second example. As we always have as our tradition, we're going to listen to this new lecture and then we're going to listen to my response as well, all right? So let us get into this. Dear students, let us start listening now.
Let's continue our discussion of animal adaptations by talking about special features that make it possible for certain fish to survive in the deepest part of the ocean, a place where almost no light reaches. Specifically, I'm going to talk about two very different features. All right, to start with, some deep-sea fish have large tube-shaped eyes that always point upwards. One such species is known as the spookfish. These fish live thousands of meters below the surface of the ocean in almost total darkness. However, since their unique eyes point upward at all times, they have the ability to spot the faint outlines of fish swimming above them in parts of the ocean where a little light can reach. Once they spot such fish, they quickly swim upwards and eat them. I should also mention that their eyes are really huge, so they are able to detect even extremely tiny fish passing above. Next up is a type of fish that is able to create its own light. The lanternfish has a series of tiny organs throughout its body that give off light thanks to a chemical process called bioluminescence. Actually, this is the same chemical reaction that many different sea and land animals use to produce light. Anyways, the lanternfish can make itself bright enough to attract the attention of other fish in its surrounding area. If these fish are small enough, they become prey for the lanternfish. This makes it a very efficient hunter, despite the darkness of its natural environment. Interestingly, they can even use this special light to protect themselves from other organisms by matching the intensity of light coming from above. This makes it much harder for potential predators to spot them from below.
Great, there you are. Well, in this case, if you notice, the lecture was about marine biology, a little bit more complex, right? Because of course, in biology, for people who are not used to it, as me, for example, there are some technical points, some technical expressions that are not that easy to digest, let's say. Nonetheless, now we have listened to this. Remember, 20 seconds of preparation, and then you're going to have 1 minute in order to speak. So please, your summary should be something like this. Let us listen to my illustration. All right, download, and let's see. All right, let us listen. Pay attention to my introductory phrases, to my middle structure, and how I close.
In this lecture, we've been presented to the fascinating topic of features helping fishes to survive deep in the ocean's darkness. The professor mentions there is one fish called the spookfish that by having eyes always looking upwards can perceive some prey above in the only perceivable strokes of light and then to hunt them. Furthermore, the professor mentions that the lanternfishes that have bioluminescence can produce such an effect through internal organs. They are able, by this specific phenomena, to attract some prey, and when they are confused, they hunt them. They also can protect themselves by the same mechanism by matching the brightness of the environment and thus confusing those predators that are trying to hunt them.
All right, thank you very much. So as you can see, that would be the my response. Okay, so if you notice, as I told you, the template for this task is very much similar to that one of the third task. So let me show it to you, all right? For you to have it clear, and of course, to continue with that tremendous performance you've been delivering. Here you have it. It also contains 4 different steps. And well, let us discuss the first one. The first step also consists of an introduction and of course has this introductory phrase. It says, in this lecture, we've been presented to the fascinating topic of, now maybe you're wondering, why do I include this, let's say, adjective, fascinating? The reason why I do it is, well, first of all, because of aesthetic purposes, because I think that sounds very good. We've been presented to the fascinating topic, right? Secondly, because if you think about this, maybe I think that it is useful for you to convey that you are somebody who is able to listen and to get identified and, let's say, to get involved with any type of topic, not merely things that you like. So by presenting this adjective in here, I think you are certainly demonstrating that particular characteristic, that you're somebody who is open, receives topics, etc. And if you notice, it's a very, very little detail, but those are the reasons I postulate for you to follow it. Now, of course, remember, this is just a template. You can vary, change the wording if you are not very much comfortable with it. If you, for example, want to follow a more complex wording for the introductory phrase, please feel free to do it, and also very much encouraged to do it. All right. So what else? That is the first step, is this introductory phrase. In this lecture, we've been presented to the fascinating topic of, and here, if you notice, well, it's like the wording is forcing me to mention the title, right, of the lecture. I always say, right, in this lecture, we've been presented to the fascinating topic of opportunity costs. Or in the second illustration, we've been presented to the fascinating topic of mechanisms that help fishes to survive deep in the ocean's darkness, right? Those are the topics. Now, after I finalize with this step that basically consists in the following, or what I have said already, you have to move on to the second step. Now, what is the second step all about? Simple. Is your summary of the lecture. As you can see, it says here, first lecture points and illustration. Why do I say this? For a very similar purpose to the one that I set when I recommended you remember in the third task, always include the illustrations that the professor gives after the points he makes in his lecture. Because if you notice, dear students, when you were paying attention to the illustrations, professors always offer some points, some particular marks in their lectures. They organize it somehow, and they also offer some illustrations for their students to understand those points. Now, it's very important for you to include all that, okay, all of those points, all those illustrations in your summary. That's the reason why I am emphasizing and clarifying here, your summary must contain first lecture's point and illustration. Thirdly, second lecture's point and illustration. And fourthly and lastly, third lecture's point and illustration. And remember that professors always, like I say, offer illustrations for their students to understand the topics. So those illustrations should certainly be included in your response. They are very important parts of the lecture, even if you don't consider them to be that way in an initial manner. If you think about it, illustrations are very important because, as I do with you, for example, that when we are discussing these topics, I always try to show you an illustration for you to understand and to have a better understanding and perception of the topic. The professors also do that in their lectures. Therefore, it's very important for you to make sure that such illustrations are included in your summaries, okay? Because they are essential, as I say. Of course, not all illustrations in the sense that sometimes professors give multiple illustrations to just one point. So for example, if you remember one point in the first illustration that was about, what was it? It was, I'm sorry, I forgot, opportunity costs, right? The professor gave the example. Opportunity costs is basically what you can do, let's say, different to an activity in the same amount of time, or what you could have done instead of doing something. And he gives a lot of examples. He says, if you watch a 2 hours movie, maybe in that same time you could have gone to have fun with your friends, or maybe you could have watched another movie, or maybe you could have simply worked in the coffee shop. If you noticed in my response, I only mentioned one of those illustrations, the one that talked about going out with your friends. I didn't mention the other movie, and I didn't mention the coffee shop. Why? Because I knew that they were not, well, completely relevant. It was sufficient for me to write, or excuse me, to mention one illustration in this case. So as I say, it's a matter of being very much selective when deciding what you're going to include in your responses. We're going to talk about that, so don't worry. But as you can see, first exercise point, illustration, always in that order, please. Because if you mention the points first and then the illustrations, as I say, you're going to complicate your own evaluation because it's difficult for the reviewer to identify what illustration belongs to what point and etc. So please try to mention the point and the illustration the professor gives. Second point and the illustration the professor gives for that point, and so on and so forth. Okay? Is there any question, dear students, about this particular structure template? Please tell me. No questions? Sergio, did you manage to solve your little problem with your microphone, or maybe you have written it in the chat box? Dear Sergio?
Hello, Carlos. Yes, I think I have solved my problem with my microphone.
Fantastic. Please, so delight us with your question then.
Yes, I've been asking if you have some hack in this structure in this last speaking part. Like in the last one, we have to pay attention a lot on our notes, right? To do a better speaking, like a
Mhm.
delete and try to adjust our speaking to the 60 seconds. Do you have any kind of advice or hack to this part?
All right. Thank you very much, Sergio. Fantastic. Now I got your question. So yeah, I actually do have a hack that I want to share with you, and it's more related to your speaking. I'm gonna give it. Don't worry. It's actually my next slide, but very glad that you have mentioned that. And yes, when you say in, yeah, you're going to be receiving a lot of information in this particular lecture, and of course, sometimes it could be overwhelming to decide what to include, what not to include. I'm gonna give you a hack for deciding what to include in your response, what part or illustration to include in the summary. And I'm going to give you another hack for you to, let's say, ace your punctuation in this task that I think it's very much applicable. Okay, so let us talk about that. Let me move on to my next slide. Are we? But before we get into that, any other question, your students, any other thing that I could clarify before we get into those recommendations for this task? Anything about clarifications? Tell me. Anais, Jorge, Adriana, Fabi, any question?
I have a question. Yeah, can we use connector like however like after like also in the if I used connectors in the first lecture, second lecture, and the third lecture, that will not sound like a little bit repetitive, or how can I use connector but in in a in a way that don't feel like force or like normal. I don't know if I can explain my
Yeah,
question.
yeah, certainly. No, it's very good.
Okay.
Thank you, Nate. Yeah, I think that using connectors is actually a fantastic decision. If you notice in my responses, I try to use some connectors as well. And I think that how can you make it natural? Well, by varying. That is to say, sometimes use them, and in some other points, just simply say, well, now the second point was this. And you continue with your explanation without you mentioning a connector. As I say, the better manner to, or the best, excuse me, manner to make it very much natural and as if it weren't forced or planned is to make a variation. Sometimes to use it, sometimes not to use it. And certainly, please, you're very much encouraging all of you. Your students are very much encouraged to use connectors. That's the reason why the first material, if you remember, that I sent to the WhatsApp group was about connectors. And I think that they give very much solidity to these responses. So please use them, okay? And as I say, varying, sometimes using connectors, sometimes going straight to the information. That way is going to sound very natural and very much presentable as well, okay? Great. I think that's it. Well, what else? Let's move on to those slides that I was mentioning and the hacks that Sergio had brought to the discussion. All right. So first thing, or first tip I wanted to give, recommendations. For this section, you are going to receive a lot of information and sensitive data, as you noticed already. Therefore, your minutes, your students, is maybe not going to be sufficient for you to include it all. That is why, you must be very savvy, clever, right, intelligent, to include just that information that stands as the central points made in the lecture. Now, the way you are going to identify those elementary points is by looking at the following traits. So here's my first hack. How can you identify and decide in your selection process what information to include in your summary, what things to discard, what things to dispense with? Now, please look at the following traits. First trait or characteristic you should look for: how much time the professor actually spends on the specific topic. If little, then you can dispense with it. Think about it. Sometimes professors spend a long time in comparison to other topics in a single element. And the reason why they do so is because those are main ideas. So my recommendation is try to pay attention to that particular behavior. If the professor spends a long time discussing a particular idea or topic in comparison to others, that is because he considers that topic or point to be central, elementary. And that is certainly something, that you would like to include in your response. So as I say, pay attention to how much time is the professor discussing something. If little time, well, dispense with it. Because if the professor is not giving it too much relevance, I think it's not healthy for us to give it relevance as well. So, second trait, how much you can understand the lecture without a specific topic. And here, let me explain it with my words. Always ask yourself the following question. If I, or in this manner, ask yourself this question. Could my reviewer understand my lecture without this point? Or excuse me, I'm gonna repeat. Could my reviewer understand my summary without this point? Why do I say this? Because when you are selecting what information, data, illustrations to include in your response and what not to include, if you ask yourself, if I don't add this information, that is to say, if I simply exclude it from my response, would my reviewer still be able to understand my summary? And if you respond yes to that question, then dispense with it. Why? Because if somebody can understand your summary without a topic, of course, it's because it's not main, it's not central, it's not elementary. Nonetheless, if you ask yourself that question, you say, okay, could my reviewer understand this summary without me including this point? And you respond, no, he couldn't be, or he couldn't understand it. He wouldn't be able to get the idea of the summary, then include it. Why? Because if something is so relevant or as relevant for you to say, okay, if I don't include this in my response, nobody's going to understand my summary because everything is going to be unconnected and lacking any sense. Include it. Why? Because as I say, it's a main idea, it's central. But if you say, no, I mean, if I don't include this, nobody's going to notice it. Well, don't include it because as I say, it's not important. How can you identify this or how can you understand this more graphically? For example, if you remember the first illustration that I showed you that was about opportunity costs, the professor mentioned the opportunity cost is basically that activity that you can do, or it's the same thing that you could have done alternatively for something, right? And he says, if you, for example, watch a 2 hours long movie, what you could have done instead is the opportunity cost. And he gives some illustrations, right? He says, you could have, for example, go out with your friend. You could have, for example, I don't know, what he said, oh, he says going and watching another movie, or you could have instead worked in a coffee shop. So he gave, excuse me, 3 different illustrations. Nonetheless, in my summary, I just included one that was that you can actually go out with your friends instead of watching a 2 hours long movie. Why did I do this? Because I noticed that if I didn't mention 2 of these illustrations, it wasn't necessary for me to make my summary understandable to the reviewer. I knew, okay, if I just include one illustration to this point, my reviewer is anyways going to understand it. So I, of course, dispense with the rest of illustrations because I knew, okay, well, the professor didn't actually spend a lot of time discussing this. And he also, as I said, offered a particular illustration that would be sufficient for me to explain my topic and to make it understandable. So I just went for one of those illustrations. And that is what you should do. Think about it. Think how much time is the professor spending? And also, if you don't mention it, is somebody going to notice it? Will people be able to understand it? If you say, no, they are not going to be able to understand if I dispense with this, well, include it. But if you say, nobody's going to notice it, don't include it because as I say, it's not relevant. Okay, it's not central. That is my first recommendation, my first hack. Second, as this will be a long response, dear students, about a single topic, try to include varied intonation throughout your response for you to make it interesting to the reviewer. By doing this, you will keep him always concentrated and transmit him the feeling that you will be able to be a great expositor in a university. What do I mean by this? If you notice, American people normally are very expressive in their speaking, in their way of speaking. There are people who are very much expressive with their tone of voice, with their pitch, with their facial gestures. There are people very much expressive. So when you are summarizing this topic, that is a lecture, remember that your reviewer is not just going to evaluate your exam. He's going to listen to infinite recordings on that same day. So probably you're going to find this person a little bit bored, right? Maybe exhausted. It could happen. We are human beings. Therefore, if you want to make it interesting, if you want to catch his attention so that he pays attention to what you say, so that he enjoys your response, what you should do is to, as I say, include varied intonation throughout your response for making it interesting to the reviewer. As I say, if you make it in a very normal and let's say a stable pitch of voice, like today we have discussed this topic that is about the information source and I mean, if you speak like that, of course, it's going to be very difficult for your reviewer to appreciate your response and also to value it as you deserve. So as I say, make it interesting, varied intonation. Say, today we're going to discuss this very interesting topic. Now, let's go and discuss the opportunity cost. Opportunity costs, according to the professor, are the following, right? I mean, including all those details and let's say ornaments that I think, of course, are very much helpful for you to, well, to decorate your response and to make it, as I say, interesting and appealing. So whenever you are in this task and also in any other task of the speaking section, try to include this hack because by doing this, you're going to avoid any difficulty of your reviewer not being in a good mood that day and not giving you a good qualification because of that, or for example, not paying attention to you because, well, as I say, there are so many responses and so many of them that are super generic, super constant, super boring, that of course it could happen to him as a human being that he's not even going to pay attention to your response. But nonetheless, if you make it interesting by yourself, how could somebody not give himself the time for listening your response very well and appreciating it? So as I say, this is a hack that you definitely want to include. Try to always make your Your responses, varying intonation, to make it, as I say, funny, not in the sense of making joke, but as I say, to give it a good pitch, good intonation, and transmitting that, as I say, feeling that you will be a good expositor in a university. Because remember, this task is specifically this one is especially designed for your university. When you apply to the university or to the work you are waiting for, this task is especially important because remember, in the university, you have to make a lot of expositions. And if you're going to work for a company abroad, you're going to have to make a lot of presentations. So what is going to happen? You are going to be required to speak in public. Now, if that happens, you are going to need to deliver a good speech. And here is the moment for you to demonstrate those skills. That you are fully competent to offer a good response that is well delivered, interesting, and appealing, as I say. So please take this hack into consideration. Apart from that, what I can say is, again, prepare always your response, right? Your sheet of notes with the structure. Write down the structure and leave for you some blank space. And apart from that, as I say, when you are in this part, try to relax a little bit more. Don't be anxious for finalizing this task and the section. Respond as if it were the first part of the exam. Okay. Any question, dear students, about these hacks that I have given? Any other thing that I could clarify here? Tell me.
It's clear.
Yeah, fantastic, Jorge. What about you guys? Sergio, Anaí, Adriana, Fabiana, Camila, any questions about this particular task?
No questions.
Fantastic. What about you guys? Sergio, Adriana, Fabiana, Camila?
It's clear. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. So, if there are no more questions, I think we can move on. Well, that will be with regard to the theoretical part of the task. Now, what we're going to do now is to practice one exercise for you to, of course, permeate yourself with all details, experience the 20 seconds of preparation. We're going to practice, okay? And tomorrow, what are we going to do? Well, continue practicing. So as I said, we're going to start with this round right now. So please, and this is nuts. Let me just open this. Here we are. So we're going to listen to the first lecture, dear students. So please, if you have a piece of paper near you, grab it, and also please grab your pencil. Take notes. You know, this is essential for the rest of the task, okay? So you're going to listen, and then we're going to, as I said, we're going to start, we're going to start responding one by one, as we have done in the past, okay? So please, let's start listening now.
All right, now that you all have microscopes at your tables, I want to explain how they work and how to use them. First of all, you should know that they are compound microscopes, so they can magnify objects up to 1,000 times their size. These microscopes have two systems, an illuminating system and an imaging system. You'll see that the illuminating system has a light source built in, and you can control it by adjusting the lever on the side. Why is this important? Well, the specimen must be pretty thin, or let's say transparent enough to let light pass through it. So the light source controls the amount of light that passes through the specimen. Okay, the other system provides magnification. Use this lever to switch powers. So when you switch to a higher power, you see a larger image. And when you switch to a lower power, you see a smaller image. But I should remind you that the field of view is smaller at a higher power. In other words, at a higher magnification, you see a larger image of a smaller area. Okay, so what about the focus? Well, These microscopes are parfocal, and that means you usually don't have to refocus when you switch to a higher or lower power of magnification. But there are two adjustment knobs, the larger one for coarse adjustment and the smaller one for fine adjustment, just in case.
Using the main points and examples from the talk, describe the two major systems of the laboratory microscope, and then explain how to use it.
Great. Well, there you are. That would be the lecture. Okay. Now that we have listened to this, it is time for us to start with the responses round. So here you have the timer. I'm gonna edit this so that you can have your 20 seconds. Here's 0, and here 20 seconds. Well, great. So remember, how much time do you have to prepare your responses in this particular task? Well, 20 seconds. All right. That is the difference with regard to the timing. So please, dear students, all of you, start preparing your responses for this question now. Well, there you are. Now, who's going to be the first one? Please, dear Sergio, could you start with this round? Okay. So please help me with your microphone enabled. And please, dear Sergio, start responding to this question now.
Okay, we have been illustrated by a very interesting topic that is how to use microscopes. In this case, we have listened how to use the microscope compound. That it is like 1,000 times their size, to watch 1,000 times their size, and this microscope has two systems: the illuminating system and the imaging system. It has the light source built in, and this part it is very important because when we're using the light source built in is to watch some samples that are very thin or maybe are very transparent, and it has two types of power: the higher power and the lower power. The higher power it is for larger images, and the lower power is for smaller images. And the higher power is for magnification to the samples, and it has a very option that is the focus parafocal. This means that don't have to refocus the microscope when you have to change the higher to lower power.
Okay. Thank you very much, Sergio, for your response. Very good. Let's continue with Anai. So please, dear Anai, you're going to be the second one. Please start, dear Anai, responding to this question now.
In this lecture, we have been presented the fascinating topic of microscopy, how it works and how it used. The first thing that we have to know about microscope is the target that it has. It is magnificent objects, and how is component a microscopy. So the first thing that is component is the illumination that is controlled, and we can see pretty thin things or transparent things. And the other one is the magnification, that we can see a small image into a large image. So one thing important about this kind of microscopy is we don't have to refocus, because this system and this technology focus by themselves, and it's really important to watch to see really tiny things in the microscopy.
Great. Thank you very much. Like, fantastic. Dear Jorge, you're going to continue. All right. So please start, dear Jorge, responding to the question now.
In this lecture, we've been immersed in the interesting topic of how compound microscopes work and the two systems that allow the microscope to show images that are 1,000 times their size. The first system is called the illuminating system, and this one has a light source that can be adjusted to determine how much light we want to pass through the thin and transparent specimen that we are observing through the microscope. On the other hand, we have the magnifying system. This one allows to see the larger image. However, this has a disadvantage that the higher your magnification is, the lower the field of view that you can see. And those are the two most important aspects of compound microscope that allow the control of the illuminating system and also how higher the magnification is. That'll be it.
Great. Thank you very much, dear Jorge. Very good. Let me continue with Adriana. Please, Adriana, you're going to continue, right? So please start responding to the question now.
Okay, the lecture, regarding the lecture, the main topic is about the microscope and it's about the microscope. This kind of microscope has two systems, one of illuminating system and imaging system. The illuminating system is for adjusting how much light that we need to analyze a thick and transparent sample. And the imaging system is for the magnification of an image. You can make it larger or smaller. It depends what you need. Also, this kind of microscope has they have a focus system, and this means that you don't need to refocus when you want to see a higher or a smaller image. That's it.
Great. Thank you very much, Adriana. Very good. We're going to continue with Fabiana. Please, hear Fabiana. Enable your microphone. And please, hear Fabiana, start responding to the question now.
Okay. In this topic, we talk about the two different types of microscopes that exist, and there are two types, the illuminated and the magnified. The illuminated works for transparent things and to be able to see the specimen well, and the magnified works to see smaller or larger objects. And also you can find the focal, and the focal exists the large one and the smaller one, and that's the system of this microscope.
Great. Thank you, Fabiana. Very good. Okay, let us finalize this round with Camila. Please, hear Camila. You're going to close, okay? So please start responding to your Camila now.
Okay. We have been delighted with a topic that talks about microscopes and how we can take advantage of its characteristics. So we have to consider that these are compound and magnifier objects. We can talk about the focus, which is parfocal, which means that we don't have to refocus, and these have two adjustments. Then we can talk about their systems. They have two systems. One is the illuminating, which have that has light source built in. This system is important because since the specimen is almost transparent, it helps us to study it. And then we have the imaging system, which it helps us with magnification, and it switches powers, and it helps us to get a larger image.
Great. Thank you very much, Camila. Fantastic. Well, overall, I can say of all your responses that they have been fantastic. As I told you, I'm very much content with your performances and level. Tomorrow, I'm going to give you more personalized feedback, all right, when we start with our just practical class. Nonetheless, for tonight's purposes, I think that the practice has been quite successful, okay? So let us stop here, your students, all right? I'm going to tell your assistants before you go. And also, please, your students, help me with the traditional poll that we always fill. And you know that you help me a lot, okay, by filling it positively. So please help me with that. And now I'm going to tell your assistants. If you have any question or commentary, please feel free to express it as I tell you the list. In any ways, you can always reach me out through WhatsApp, right? You know that. There we are. So please listen to your name, your students. Here we are. Is here present Benitez Jorge Alberto?
Here.
Thank you very much, Jorge. What about Anaí Stefania?
Here.
Thank you very much, Anaí. What about Jose Miguel? All right, Alondra Lisette. Zúñiga Sergio.
I'm here.
Thank you very much, Sergio. What about Quiroga Adriana?
I'm here.
Thank you very much, Adriana. What about Salguero Fabiana?
I'm here.
Thank you very much. Mayra Alejandra. All right, and finally, Ramirez Camila.
Present.
Thank you very much for joining us, Camila. Fantastic. There you are. Well, as you can see, that's it. Thank you very much to your students for your responses. And tomorrow is going to be a merely practical class. So if you have the opportunity to have a quiet space, please get into that place and also prepare your microphone, okay? See you tomorrow. Have a wonderful night.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
you.
Bye-bye.
Carlos.
Thank you.